Dick was so good-looking and tall and endearing and a wonderful partner to work with.
At 90, Julie Andrews has finally opened up about her bond with Dick Van Dyke, who, at 98, is still capturing hearts in a way that feels almost unreal. But what was actually said during the Dick Van Dyke 98 Years of Magic is only part of the story. Behind those warm words lies something deeper, something fans of Mary Poppins have been quietly wondering about for years. Why does that laughter, especially during Jolly Holiday, still feel so alive decades later? And more importantly, why speak now, after all this time? Stay right here to find out. At 90, Julie Andrews exposes Dick Van Dyke. So there was this really sweet moment that happened back in December 2023, and it all came about because of a big CBS special put together to celebrate Dick Van Dyke turning 98. The show was called Dick Van Dyke 98 Years of Magic, and it ran for 2 hours. What made the whole thing extra special was that Van Dyke had no idea what was actually going on. As far as he knew, he was just showing up for a regular press interview. So when the whole thing turned out to be this massive career celebration, the surprise on his end was very real. Julie Andrews was part of that special, and according to reports, she used the platform to talk about things she had kept to herself for a long time, including memories from when the two of them first met and what it was actually like working together. Now, Andrews has been living in Switzerland for years, so catching up in person is not exactly easy. But according to Van Dyke's wife Arlene, the two have worked out a clever little system to stay connected over the years. Basically, when one of them is being honored at some event, the other sends in a video message. Then, when the roles are reversed, the same thing happens. So there is always this back and forth, this quiet but steady thread of mutual support running between them. Arlene put it simply, when one is getting honored, the other does a video and vice versa. A small gesture, maybe, but it says a lot about how much the two genuinely value what started between them over 6 decades ago. Now, Andrews had actually spoken briefly about Van Dyke before. In a 2019 biography called Home, a Memoir of My Early Years, there was a mention of how Van Dyke could still pull off the steps from the famous Jolly Holiday sequence in Mary Poppins. But that was just a line or two. The CBS special was reportedly the most open and detailed Andrews had ever been publicly about the full extent of what the friendship and working relationship actually meant. And here is the thing. The two of them have not shared a screen in 60 years. 60 years. So one might wonder, how does a friendship even survive that? Especially when you factor in different countries, different schedules, and the kind of lives that come with being two of the most recognizable figures in entertainment history. But apparently, the connection never really went away. It just settled into something quieter and more private. What makes the whole story even more interesting is how close the two came to being reunited on screen much sooner than anyone realized. When Van Dyke was working on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in 1968, just 4 years after Mary Poppins, he wanted Andrews for the role of Truly Scrumptious. That would have been quite the reunion, but Andrews turned it down. As Van Dyke later explained, at that point in her career, she simply did not want to take on any more children's films. Van Dyke, on the other hand, admitted he loves that kind of work, so the paths diverged, and that on-screen reunion never happened. The public moments between the two have been few, but always warmly received. Back in 2013, when Saving Mr. Banks had its premiere, Andrews and Van Dyke were spotted on the red carpet together for the first time in 50 years. And by all accounts, the two picked right back up, chatting like old friends catching up over coffee, rather than two legends marking half a century apart. Then, in 2021, Andrews introduced Van Dyke at the Kennedy Center Honors, and the words chosen for that introduction were striking. Andrews described him as being just as magical as Mary Poppins herself, and called him a spreader of charm. There was also this lovely detail about how good luck tends to rub off on people when Van Dyke shakes hands with them. It was warm, generous, and clearly heartfelt rather than rehearsed flattery. Van Dyke, for his part, has never been shy about how much he valued Andrews as a collaborator. In a memoir titled My Lucky Life in and Out of Show Business, Van Dyke referred to Andrews as a perfect partner and noted that throughout the entire filming of Mary Poppins, not once did Andrews complain. Not once. For anyone who has ever worked on a major film production and knows how grueling and unpredictable things can get behind the scenes, that kind of detail says something real about the kind of professional Andrews was. It was not just about talent, it was about character. So when all of this is taken together, what does it actually paint? Two people who met on a film set in 1964 created something that has genuinely outlasted almost everything else from that era of cinema, and then went on to maintain a quiet, consistent, genuine friendship for the better part of a century. No drama, no falling out, no messy public history. Just two people who clearly liked and respected each other from the very beginning and never stopped. Is that not a rare thing, especially in an industry not exactly known for long-lasting, genuine connections? The CBS special, in many ways, was just the latest chapter in something that started when two young performers were dropped into the magical world of a nanny with an umbrella and a chimney sweep with a terrible English accent. And 60 years later, both of them are still showing up for each other, one video message at a time. The untold story of their Mary Poppins days. Mary Poppins filming kicked off in May 1963, and for Andrews, that timing was no joke. Just 6 weeks before cameras rolled, she had given birth to her daughter Emma. On top of that, stepping onto a movie set was completely new territory. So imagine that, still finding her footing with a newborn, and suddenly having to show up and carry a major Hollywood production. Pretty overwhelming, right? Andrews herself admitted she felt completely out of her depth. She recalled realizing pretty quickly that pulling up her socks and getting into shape was not optional. It was necessary. The role was physically demanding, and there was no easing into it. To get ready, Andrews worked out every single day and spent a solid 3 months in rehearsals before a single frame was shot. During that time, songs were pre-recorded and choreography was learned from scratch. For someone navigating new motherhood at the same time, that kind of discipline is genuinely impressive. Now, Van Dyke was already deep into rehearsals with the choreographers and dancers when Andrews arrived on set for the first time. Andrews described him as young, incredibly fit, and, to put it in her own words, really gorgeous to look at. But beyond the looks, what mattered most was how Van Dyke made Andrews feel on a set that was completely foreign to her. By Andrews' account, Van Dyke could not have been kinder or more genuinely sweet and helpful. And honestly, when someone is doing something for the first time ever, let alone while recovering from childbirth, that kind of warmth from a co-star makes all the difference in the world. One area where that support really showed up was during the recording sessions. Van Dyke had a tough time matching Andrews' soprano range. Andrews reportedly sang just a hair above the note, and Van Dyke kept going flat, trying to keep up. Rather than letting those moments become tense or frustrating, Andrews stepped in with a simple bit of guidance, telling Van Dyke to think high, to mentally aim up there. Just a small nudge. That back and forth between them says a lot about the kind of working relationship that was forming. Two people genuinely trying to help each other get it right. And watching Van Dyke rehearse, Andrews found pure joy in that. Here was this tall, lanky man throwing himself fully into imitating animated penguins and attempting to ride a carousel pony, bit by bit turning into the magical, lovable chimney sweep Bert was always meant to be. There is something about watching a performer completely commit to a role. No self-consciousness, no holding back. That is infectious. For Andrews, a first-timer on set, having that kind of energy nearby probably made the whole experience feel far less scary. Then came the Jolly Holiday sequence, one of the earliest choreography sessions the two shared. Andrews approached it the way Mary Poppins would: demure, precise, every step neat and ladylike. Van Dyke had a completely different idea. Those long legs of his went flying, way higher than anyone expected. Andrews reportedly burst out laughing, and just like that, the tone was set. Not stiff, not formal, but full of genuine fun and ease between two people figuring out something magical together. What makes all of this worth talking about is the context. Andrews was not some seasoned Hollywood veteran falling back on years of on-camera experience. Film was entirely new ground, and the personal circumstances surrounding that first day on set were demanding in ways that had nothing to do with acting. 6 weeks postpartum, 3 months of intense rehearsals already under the belt, and still showing up ready. The laughter during Jolly Holiday was not just a cute behind-the-scenes moment, it was a signal that despite everything, Andrews had found her footing. And a lot of that came down to landing alongside a co-star who made the space feel safe enough to laugh in the first place. Van Dyke's patience and warmth throughout production were not small things. Recording sessions alone could have become a source of friction. Ranges not matching, takes dragging on, frustrations building. Instead, those moments became collaborative. Andrews helping Van Dyke find the note, Van Dyke offering kindness and support to a nervous first-timer. That mutual generosity shaped what audiences would eventually see on screen. Two performers who genuinely seemed to enjoy being in each other's company. And that enjoyment was earned, not manufactured. Andrews came in working harder than most newcomers would have needed to. 3 months of rehearsals, daily workouts, songs pre-recorded, and choreography locked in, all before the cameras even started rolling. That level of preparation, especially given the circumstances, shows just how seriously Andrews took the opportunity. Feeling daunted is one thing, letting it stop the work is another. Andrews clearly chose the latter. Looking back at how that production came together, the story is really one of an extraordinary set of conditions producing something remarkable. A first-time film actress, weeks out from giving birth, walking into one of Disney's most ambitious live-action productions, and walking out of it with one of the most beloved performances in cinema history. The rehearsal room, the recording sessions, the laughter, mid-choreography, all of it added up to something that felt effortless on screen, even though the behind-the-scenes reality was anything but. And Van Dyke's role in all of that deserves more credit than it sometimes gets. Yes, Andrews was the anchor of the film. Yes, her preparation and talent were undeniable. But arriving on an unfamiliar set as a first-timer, having a co-star who is genuinely kind, patient, and supportive, that changes everything. Andrews said as much. Van Dyke simply could not have been kinder. Coming from someone navigating that much at once, that is not a throwaway compliment. That is gratitude rooted in a very specific kind of relief. By the time Jolly Holiday was in full swing and Van Dyke's legs were flying through the air and Andrews was doubled over laughing, what was really happening was two people who had built enough trust to be fully present with each other. That sequence became a fan favorite for a reason. And a big part of that reason started not on camera, but in the rehearsal room, in the recording booth, and in the small moments of encouragement passed between a nervous newcomer and a co-star who made sure she never felt alone in it. What made Dick Van Dyke different from other co-stars? Dick Van Dyke had this rare thing going on where just showing up to rehearsal was already half the fun. Julie Andrews would talk about how laughing and learning the choreography for Jolly Holiday basically happened at the same time, and that there were countless moments where Van Dyke just made her completely dissolve into giggles. Not polite laughter either, proper, can't catch your breath giggles. And that kind of energy on a film set is not something that can be manufactured or directed into existence. Either someone brings that warmth naturally or nothing. What was Andrews actually watching that made the whole thing so delightful? Van Dyke imitating the animated penguins, for one, attempting to ride the carousel pony, fully committing to becoming a magical chimney sweep with everything that entails. Andrews would later describe the entire production as a genuinely happy one for the whole company. And when someone like Andrews, who had seen enough of the industry to know the difference, says that about a set, it carries some real weight. Happy film sets are not exactly the industry standard, so the fact that this one consistently felt joyful speaks directly to the kind of presence Van Dyke brought every single day. Now, where did that physical genius come from? Van Dyke had done the work of studying the greats. Stan Laurel, Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, the silent era masters who understood that a body could tell a joke better than any line of dialogue. Carol Burnett, someone who knew a thing or two about physical comedy herself, described Van Dyke's physicality as supple. Others reached for a different image entirely, saying Van Dyke moved like a cartoon brought to life, which, considering what ended up happening in Mary Poppins, feels almost prophetic. Jim Carrey, another performer who built a career on contorting reality through a body, put it plainly. Van Dyke could be funny without saying a single word. Carrey said Van Dyke could have done the silent films, full stop. Coming from Carrey, that is not a throwaway compliment. That is one physical comedian recognizing something genuinely extraordinary in another. What made Van Dyke stand apart, though, was not just the technique borrowed from those silent film legends. Andrews was clear on this. Van Dyke had a completely original style, not a derivative of Chaplin, not a riff on Keaton. Something entirely his own, something that could not be traced back to any single source. That originality is what Andrews said made Van Dyke totally unique, and Andrews was not the type to throw that word around loosely. When pressed to describe what made Van Dyke so remarkable as a performer, Andrews found herself unable to rank any one talent above the others. Singing, dancing, physical comedy, timing, warmth, all of it operating at the same high level simultaneously. Andrews put it simply: naming one of Van Dyke's talents as better than the next was something Andrews found impossible to do. That kind of balance is genuinely rare. Most performers have a primary mode, a comedian who can sort of carry a tune, a dancer who is charming enough on screen. Van Dyke was not operating with a primary mode. Everything was the primary mode. But here is the thing that Andrews kept coming back to, the quality that perhaps sat above all the technical gifts. Van Dyke had this instinct, this genuine need to bring everyone around him into whatever was happening. Not performing at an audience, but pulling an audience into the performance with both hands. Andrews described this as a rare gift possessed by only a very small number of people, and the name that came to mind alongside Van Dyke was Judy Garland, not a random comparison. Garland was someone who could reach through a screen, through a stage, through the recording of a voice, and make a person feel personally seen and included. To put Van Dyke in that company says something significant about what Andrews believed was happening during those performances. That quality, the generosity of it, the instinct to share rather than simply display, changes the whole experience of watching someone. There is a difference between admiring a performer and feeling like a performer is performing with and for a specific person at a specific moment. Van Dyke apparently operated in the second category, which is the harder and more meaningful one. Going back to the beginning of all of this, Andrews remembered the first time the two of them met, and the impression was immediate and came from a few different directions at once. Physically, Van Dyke was described as looking young, fit, genuinely gorgeous. Andrews would recall this later with a kind of warmth and amusement, as if the memory still held some charge. But the physical impression, vivid as it was, turned out to be secondary. What landed more deeply was the character of the person. Andrews described Van Dyke as someone who could not have been kinder, more genuinely sweet, more truly helpful. And the word genuinely matters there. Hollywood sets have always had their share of performed warmth, the kind of niceness that functions as social currency and evaporates the moment cameras stop rolling. What Andrews seemed to be describing was something else entirely, a real quality, not a professional one. Kindness as a default setting rather than a strategic tool. For someone like Andrews, walking onto a Hollywood film set for the very first time, the stakes of that first experience could not have been higher. Mary Poppins was not a small project. The pressure was significant, the scrutiny real, and the whole enterprise could have been isolating and overwhelming. Andrews would later reflect on how lucky having Van Dyke there felt. Lucky to have someone like that by the side for a first venture into Hollywood. Not just a talented co-star, but a genuine presence. Someone whose nature made the whole thing feel safer, lighter, more possible. And maybe that is the through line connecting everything. The giggles during rehearsal, the physical genius, the all-around talent, the Garland-level gift for inclusion, the genuine sweetness on set. All of it comes from the same source, which seems to be a person who genuinely loved performing and genuinely loved other people. Those two things together, operating at full volume, produced something that cast members, co-stars, and audiences have been trying to accurately describe for decades. Andrews gave it the most precise language available, completely original, totally unique, and lucky. She said lucky to have been there for it. The legacy of their partnership in Hollywood. Mary Poppins walked away from the 1965 Academy Awards with 5 wins. Best Actress went to Andrews, and the film also claimed Best Original Score and Best Original Song for Chim Chim Cher-ee. Not bad for a movie about a magical nanny, a chimney sweep, and a family that needed saving. The chemistry between Andrews and Van Dyke on screen was something audiences had not quite seen before. Two performers who seemed genuinely delighted to be sharing a frame together. That kind of warmth is hard to manufacture, and clearly, nobody manufactured it. So what makes a film hold up for 60 years? Mary Poppins keeps finding new audiences, keeps getting watched by children who then show it to their own children. Part of that is the music, part of it is the fantasy, but a big part of it is simply the two people at the center of it. Andrews brought precision and grace. Van Dyke brought something looser and more unpredictable. Together, the balance worked. Andrews recently spoke about Van Dyke's legacy in a way that probably said more than any formal tribute could. To paraphrase, Andrews described Van Dyke as the consummate performer, someone whose contribution to entertainment cannot be reduced to a single role or a single decade. That word, consummate, is worth sitting with for a moment. It does not just mean talented, it means complete, fully realized. Someone who has mastered not just the craft, but the entire spirit of performing. Coming from Andrews, who is no stranger to that standard herself, the description carries real weight. Van Dyke turned 100 years old on December 13th. 100. And the conversation around that milestone was not about a long career winding down. It was about a career that somehow kept finding new energy. Retirement, apparently, was never seriously on the table. At an age when most people have long since stepped back from public life, Van Dyke was still showing up, still performing, still looking for the next interesting thing to do. Take the a cappella group. In mid-70s, Van Dyke started a group called Dick Van Dyke and the Fantastics. Not as a nostalgia exercise, not as a one-off charity performance, but as an actual ongoing musical project. The group performed regularly, and Van Dyke brought the same enthusiasm to barbershop-style harmonies as anything else in a decades-long career. Most people slow down in their 70s. Van Dyke apparently decided to add something new to the schedule. Then there is the Coldplay moment. Just before turning 99, Van Dyke appeared in the music video for All My Love, dancing barefoot, not sitting in a chair, looking distinguished, not delivering a brief cameo while standing still, dancing, barefoot. At 98, the video introduced Van Dyke to an entirely new generation of fans who may have had only a vague sense of who this person was. And suddenly, there was a very clear answer. Someone still fully alive and fully present in the world. That crossover moment matters. Coldplay has a global audience that skews younger. And placing Van Dyke in that video was not just a cute idea, it was a statement about what sustained vitality actually looks like. There was nothing performative about it. Van Dyke was not trying to seem young. Van Dyke was simply being Van Dyke, which at any age tends to involve movement, music, and a noticeable absence of self-consciousness. PBS also came calling. An American Masters documentary was released featuring new interviews with Andrews and others who had worked with or admired Van Dyke over the years. American Masters does not make films about people who are merely famous. The series focuses on figures whose work genuinely shaped American culture, and inclusion in that catalog is its own form of recognition. Andrews, speaking in that context, reflecting on a partnership that began 6 decades earlier, gave the documentary a through line that felt personal rather than ceremonial. The Kennedy Center honors added another layer. Van Dyke received the award in 2020, which is among the highest forms of recognition available to a performing artist in the United States. The following year, in 2021, Andrews was present at the ceremony to honor Van Dyke specifically. Think about what that gesture represents. Andrews did not need to be there. At a certain level of achievement, attendance at these events becomes optional. Showing up to honor a former co-star decades after the collaboration ended signals something beyond professional courtesy. It signals genuine regard. Van Dyke returned the gesture at the 48th AFI Life Achievement Award, paying tribute to Andrews. So, the pattern holds. One honors the other returns the honor, and across years and ceremonies, the mutual respect continues to express itself publicly. This is not a friendship maintained by proximity or ongoing collaboration. These are two people who made something extraordinary together a long time ago. Van Dyke's career, viewed from the vantage point of a 100th birthday, is remarkable for its range. The Dick Van Dyke Show established Van Dyke as a comedy performer of the first order in the early 1960s. Mary Poppins followed shortly after and demonstrated something different, a capacity for warmth and spectacle and musical physical comedy that the television show, for all its brilliance, could not fully accommodate. Then came Chitty, Chitty, Bang, Bang, more television, more film, decades of continued work. The career never contracted into a single identity. And yet, when people think of Van Dyke at 100, the image that likely comes to mind most readily is Bert the Chimney Sweep, dancing with animated penguins on a rooftop in London, or jumping into a chalk pavement drawing with Andrews, or performing Step in Time with an energy that should have been impossible to sustain. Those sequences, filmed in the early 1960s, still look joyful. The physical performance holds up not because of special effects or clever editing, but because the person doing the dancing was genuinely, visibly having a wonderful time. Andrews summed this up when describing Van Dyke as a consummate performer. The word consummate suggests someone for whom performance is not effort but expression, someone so thoroughly at home in front of an audience that the usual anxiety or calculation simply does not apply. Watching Van Dyke dance barefoot in a Coldplay video at 98 confirms that assessment. Whatever that quality is, it did not fade. As the centenary celebrations took shape, the surrounding conversation naturally returned to Mary Poppins and to Andrews. The two of them represent something specific in Hollywood history, a partnership forged in a single film that somehow became permanently significant. Most films do not do that. Most collaborations, however successful, belong to their moment. Mary Poppins escaped its moment and became something ongoing. And somewhere in all of that, the partnership with Andrews persists, not as a museum piece, but as a living point of reference. Two people who made something that mattered, who have spent 60 years confirming that it mattered, and who seem unlikely to stop doing so anytime soon. That is what genuine connection looks like. Hollywood has produced plenty of famous partnerships. Very few of them are still generating warmth at the 100-year mark. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.